Called for Jury Duty, Part 1, by Glitter Cricket. Last month, I was served jury duty. Initially, I thought, why me? And dreaded it like most people do. But eventually came around to the idea that it would get me out of work. I lived a boring and mundane life. All I did was work and go home to nothing. 32 years old, working at a mom-and-pop grocery store for a minimum wage, and single. I don't even have friends, just me. It was July 3rd when I got the mail that informed me I had been called. After a moment, I figured this would be the only eventful thing that would happen in my crappy life. That evening, I was working and told my manager, Bill, that I would need off for it. "Well, that's just fine, Allie. We can work that out." "I don't know what to expect, Bill. Have you ever been called?" "No, sweet pea, I haven't. But lots of people I know have. They will give you a little interview type thing to make sure you don't discriminate. And of course, you'll be involved in choosing somebody's fate. That's about all this old man knows." Bill was the owner of the market. I had known him for 3 years. He was a kind man. I looked up to him. He had me over for every big holiday, as to keep me from spending it alone. His family was more than good to me. Bill was like the grandfather I never had. There was a number on the bottom of the mail. Beside it, it read, "Call this number within 1 week of receiving this letter." I called on the 6th. I figured they'd be closed the day of, and maybe the day after a major holiday. A young woman picked up.
"County Clerk's office, this is Cheryl speaking." "Hi, Cheryl. My name is Allie Gwynn. I received a letter for jury duty, and I was calling because it requested I do so within the week." "Hold, please." "Miss Gwynn, you were the first to call,"
said a man.
"Hi, of course, my name is Martin Dorsey. I am the facilitator of the jurors." "Okay, nice to meet you, Mr. Dorsey. I've never had jury duty before, so I feel terribly ill-prepared for it. What do I do next?" "You are going to do it, Miss Gwynn. Thank you for calling. You'll be hearing from me soon."
I pulled the cell back from my ear and looked at it. I was confused. It seemed like such a weird exchange. My jury duty didn't even have a date or anything. Not that I even knew what a standard one had on it anyways, but I guess I figured you at least knew where and when to report. The next morning I asked Bill about it. "I reckon times are changing, sweet pea. Maybe it's a new protocol or something. Don't worry about it. You did what you were supposed to do." I shrugged. He was right. The rest of the weekend went by uneventful, per usual. Tuesday around noon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Usually I would let those things go straight to voicemail, but given my current situation, I figured it best to pick up.
"Hello? Miss Gwynn, how are you today?"
It was Mr. Dorsey.
"I'm doing all right. And yourself?" "Fantastic. Hey, listen, all of the jurors have now contacted us, or been contacted, and we need to meet with you on Thursday morning." "Okay. What time?" "I'm supposed to work Thursday morning." "We are meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning. This is the first screening. And don't worry about work. We will provide any work-related excuses you need. What's your email?"
I agreed and told him my email.
"Cheryl will be emailing you the details. Speak with you soon."
didn't know who this Martin Dorsey was, but he sure didn't have phone etiquette. Just as I pulled the phone back from my ear, I heard an alert.
Miss Gwynn, please report to 1519 21st Street, Street Suite 201 at 9 a.m. on Thursday, July 12th. We will provide a locker for all belongings. You may put your phone in the assigned locker or leave it at home. There will be a strict zero-phone policy. Cheryl.
I called Bill to tell him how eerie everything seemed. He assured me that it was probably just the way things were done. Thursday morning, and I arrived at the location at 8:30 a.m. After showing my ID and walking through a metal detector, I was escorted into a business room. There was a long table with lots of rolly chairs. There were 3 people already there. I wasn't sure how many people were called for jury duty, but Google had told me 12. 8 more to go. One by one, the remaining jurors piled into the room. A little chatter here and there.
Do you have any idea what's going on?
A middle-aged woman asked me. Her hair was long and gray. She had brown eyes with pink glasses. She was well put together and looked like she came from money.
Not at all,
I replied.
Does this seem a little weird to... Good morning.
It was the voice from the phone.
My name is Martin Dorsey. You can call me Martin. This is our first screening. I hope everyone found their way here all right. Looks like everyone made it. Cheryl is now going to escort you to your lockers. You will lock everything up in there. Everything. When you return, I will bring in coffee and donuts, and we will begin.
He clapped his hands together and gave a big smile. Cheryl, a tall, slender woman, escorted us to a room down the hall. The lockers all had keys in them, with a keychain that had a number engraved on them. I chose locker 4, for no particular reason. I locked up all my belongings and slid my key into my pocket. Cheryl waited on all of us to finish and then escorted us back to the room. The spread was delightful, such a variety of donuts. I chose a strawberry frosted donut with sprinkles and grabbed a coffee and with my breakfast in hand, took a seat. Everyone had settled with theirs as well.
Okay, shall we begin?
Silence.
Right. So who here has had jury duty before?
A few people raised their hands.
Great. Well, this will be different from your other experiences, I can assure you. First, we need to ask you a series of questions. Raise your hand to whatever applies.
He read the list off with things like, Are you racist? Do you know person on trial? Are you breastfeeding? Do you have any health issues, etc.? Aside from one woman being diabetic and a man having a pacemaker, everyone seemed to fit the mold.
Seems like everyone is in the right place then. So, let me give you a bit of a rundown.
Dorsey sat down and got very serious.
This is a very disturbing case. You will see things here you didn't know could happen. The defendant is accused of 54 murders over the course of 5 years. Very brutal murders, dismembered victims. We have paid millions to keep this out of the media thus far. The trial will start next week, and under no circumstances are you allowed to talk about what this case entails. Not only is it against the law, but we have the information of where you live, who your loved ones are, and blackmail on all of you.
Everyone looked around the room.
That's right. We can take any of you down, need be. Are you threatening us?
One woman asked.
Not a threat, an insurance policy. That sound good to you, Mrs. Blevins?
She nodded and looked down.
Very well. I think we've covered pretty much all the bases we had to. You will report here next week. Cheryl will send you all the details.
He stood up and gave us a look as if to say we were dismissed. We all started to stand.
Mr. Dorsey, I have a question,
an older man said.
Can you tell us why this is so hushed? 54 murders in a 5-year span sounds like something that would have been bound to get coverage. Why is this such a secret?
Mr. Dorsey's face got very serious. He paused before answering.
The accused is an 11-year-old girl,
he replied. I've been called for jury duty, Part 2, by Glitter Cricket. I got home. My head was spinning. How could this happen? An 11-year-old girl serial killer for 5 years? Oh my God, that meant she was 6 when she started. None of it made sense. The threats, the weird emails, the fact that no media had covered any aspect of this. Had it even happened here? Had the trial been moved to this small town for the purpose of keeping it buried? I picked up to call Bill, but then I remembered what Martin had said. I put the phone back down. I couldn't talk to anyone about this. I opened up my MacBook. I pulled up Google and let the spacebar flash for an eternity, wondering what to type. 54 murders by little girl. Nothing. Backspace. Serial killer, 11-year-old girl. Nothing. Backspace. 54 murders in 5 years. Nothing. How could there be nothing? What was really going on? The shady phone calls and emails, the private meetings. I had never had a jury before, but surely this wasn't how it operated. I closed my computer in frustration and dozed off on the couch. I woke up a few hours later. I checked my phone and had a new email. I opened it up, and it was from Cheryl. Miss Gwynn, you are required to be at the location from the last meeting on Monday, July 16th at 8 a.m. You will lock your things in your locker and report back to the business room for further instructions. Please dress nicely for this. You will be before a judge. Please save any questions and/or concerns for the day of. Cheryl. Day 1. Monday morning, I arrived 30 minutes early once more. I went through the metal detector, showed my ID, and headed to the locker room. I put all my things in the locker and slid the key into my dress pants. I walked into the business room, greeted by some of my fellow jurors. I grabbed a donut and coffee and sat down. The lady I had spoken to briefly at the last meeting took a seat beside me.
I don't think we ever formally were introduced. I'm Carmen.
She extended her hand, and I shook it and smiled.
Nice to meet you, Carmen. I'm Allie.
She leaned into me quietly and glanced around the room.
What the hell is going on with this case? A child murderer? Who started when she was 6? I don't know. I tried to do research, but nothing came up.
I whispered back to her.
Have you talked to anyone about this? This isn't how jury duty goes. The whole process, the emails and the private meetings. The whole thing seems so hushed. I have a bad feeling about it. I haven't talked to anyone about it. I've wanted to, but I think about what he said, you know, the blackmail.
I whispered back. She looked down at her fingers as she twirled them around one another. Her face was overcome with worry. Then she looked back up to meet my eyes.
Something is wrong, dear. Something is very wrong.
Martin walked in and everyone went silent.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everyone is here on time. Has everyone put their belongings in the lockers?
Everyone nodded.
Fantastic. Everyone stand up and follow me, please.
We stood up and got into a single file line. We walked through so many hallways and turns. We finally came up to a concrete staircase. Martin waited on all of us to reach the bottom of the stairs. Once we were all grouped together, he made an announcement.
Once we go through this door, your life will be different.
He pointed to the Victorian-style door behind him.
The things you see and hear in here will be traumatizing, but you will have to learn to cope. Let's go over a few rules before we go in, shall we? Don't make direct eye contact with the accused. Do not speak to her. Do not touch her. And we can't make eye contact? Isn't that a main way to tell if someone is telling the truth or not?
Asked a fellow juror.
Please use caution around her. She is very dangerous. You may glance at her eyes, but do not make prolonged contact. Do you understand?
He turned around and opened the door. It was a courtroom, but very rustic, like it hadn't been used in years. It didn't match the other courtrooms that were on the main floor. Being in there felt unnerving. He directed us to our chairs. We all sat down in silence. Then she walked in. Victoria Tori R. Vale. She was smaller than I had imagined, petite. She stood about 5 feet tall, very skinny, long, sleek black hair, pale skin. She looked like she had never been outside. Her skin was so white and bright and hard to look at. Freckles kissed every part of her arms and face. She walked in wearing black scrubs, her ankles shackled together, her wrists shackled in front of her. She looked at us. I felt the tension immediately. Something was very wrong. Her presence alone was disturbing. A lady on the end of our section bent over and threw up. I couldn't look away from Tori. She looked at the poor woman spewing her breakfast and then looked in my direction and smiled. Her big, brown, evil, beautiful eyes. I quickly looked down. Her stare was too heavy, too intimidating. She sat down at her table with her attorneys. She smiled at the judge, and I could feel the judge's skin crawl. After the swearing and all the introductions, we began. The prosecution started, and just as they were summing up the introduction, I felt dizzy. I felt overwhelmed and anxious. The prosecution ended with,
"And although we don't believe Miss Vale ever directly murdered anyone herself, her influence and reign over her followers has impacted hundreds of lives, spanning over the course of 5 years." Followers? I thought. This child is the leader of a cult. I've been called for jury duty, Part 3, by Glitter Cricket. I glanced in her direction and saw that she had turned her chair to face us directly, instead of facing towards the judge. She was on the end of her seat, smiling the widest grin I think I have ever seen. I couldn't stop watching her. I was in awe of her. She was beautifully disturbing. The judge told her she needed to rearrange her chair, and she shot her neck sideways towards him, the grin disappearing. He broke their eye contact and looked down towards his stand. Shall we begin?" he asked in a shaky voice. For some reason, the prosecution and defense both approached the judge's bench. They were having a hushed discussion. "I heard this was the 5th judge she's seen," a woman beside me whispered. What?
I asked, confused.
The judges keep quitting, like they won't see the trial through. Same with the jury. They've had this trial in different states. It's never finished. Always an ongoing case.
She said matter-of-factly.
But how?
I paused and looked at Tori. She was swinging around in her chair, circle after circle after circle, as fast as she could. I started to feel nauseous again.
How do you know this? Between you and me, there are a lot of scared people involved in this. People who don't want to be involved. People talk. I hear it. All you have to do is listen.
I didn't understand what she meant by that. Had she overheard a juror? Did she spy in on the ever-mysterious Cheryl? Or had she picked up on things on her own? God, I felt stupid. I mean, I knew none of this seemed right. Was I so dense that I hadn't considered reading between the lines? I started trying to piece the little things together from different conversations I was involved in or overheard. A little from here, a little from there. The prosecution and defense moved away from the bench, the prosecution sitting back at their table, but the defense walking out the door. We all sat bewildered. Tori stopped spinning in her chair and looked towards us. I'm pretty sure every single one of us bowed our heads as to not even see a glimpse of her.
We are going to have a temporary recess,
said the judge.
A recess?
A juror said to Martin, who was sitting with the prosecution.
We've been in here 30 minutes. What do we need a recess from?
The juror asked. Martin approached us.
There's been some issues with the defense. Meaning what?
Asked my new acquaintance Carmen.
Well, you see...
He trailed off in thought.
We can't seem to find a public defender to represent her. Is that even legal? Doesn't a public defender have to represent you? They get a choice.
Asked a juror.
There have been many conflicts between her and her defenders. If they feel their lives are at risk, they have a right to remove themselves from that situation.
He answered.
Screw this. I want to go home,
said a younger woman as she stood up.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Yates, but that won't be possible. Hell, it won't. So the defenders get to come in and out when they deem fit. But if we are uncomfortable or threatened by this twisted little girl, we can't remove ourselves?
She snapped back while air quoting the word remove.
Please, calm down. You don't want to get upset in front of her. Take my word on this. Fear is arousing to her. Let's just head back up to the conference room. I can order some lunch or something as we all wait. Screw your lunch. I'm not spending another minute with that psycho. Something is wrong with this, with all of this. I'm out.
She stood up and walked towards the 2 stairs that led out of the jury box. Before she got all the way around the box, she was met by Tori. Miss Yates froze, her anger turning to adrenaline and fear. Tori walked right up on her.
You think I'm a psycho?
She asked with a grin. Her voice was high-pitched and chipper. Silence. No one in the courtroom moved a muscle. The silence was finally broken by Tori's shrieking laugh.
I didn't mean... I meant...
Miss Yates stammered, her face whitewashed as if she had just witnessed something traumatic. Tori stared at her, the grin coming back across her pale face.
What a big vocabulary you have. Was psycho the best you could come up with?
She laughed, but then swallowed it, sending the silence surging back through the courtroom.
There are things far worse than what your inferior little brain can conjure up. I'd be more than willing to show you.
She smiled and stepped back as she heard the police officers coming up behind her to escort her back to her seat. They grabbed her forcefully, much harder than a child should be handled. They slung her body into the wooden roller chair so hard she did a 360, all the while laughing, hysterically laughing. Miss Yates ran out of the courtroom. Once she was properly restrained in her chair, we all stood up and followed Martin out of the courthouse, back up the concrete stairs, twisting and turning until we reached the business room. We all took a seat.
I need to go have a word with Cheryl. I'll be right back, guys. Subs for lunch, okay?
He didn't wait for a response as he left in a hurry and closed the door behind the room. Then I heard something that chilled me to my core. It was Miss Yates. She was yelling about her safety and how she was finished with jury duty, that she didn't care about the blackmail. Everyone in the room was intently listening. Then we heard her scream, followed by a big thump. We all gasped, looking around at each other, wide-eyed. Before we could even react or go towards the door, we heard something even worse than Miss Yates screaming. We heard the door lock. I've been called for jury duty, Part 4, by Glitter Cricket.
What the heck?
A man yelled.
They can't do this to us.
Chaos broke out in the courtroom. Some people trying to bust the door down, some pacing the room, some crying. I went to Carmen. Tears were pooling in the corners of my eyes. I was scared. I had no shame in that. Carmen seemed like a motherly woman. She sensed my terror, and being the nice lady she was, put her hands on my shoulders and said,
"We are going to figure this out, but I need you to pull it together and get your head in the game. Do you understand?"
I nodded my head. I watched the room. Pandemonium. It felt like everything was in slow motion. Finally, a man yelled,
"Stop!"
Everyone got still.
Listen, I think we are all on the same page here. We have the same goal. Now everyone sit down. All this commotion is not going to help us. We need to figure out what our next moves are.
Some people were sitting at the table sobbing. Some people were still voicing their anger.
"He's right,"
said Carmen as she stood up.
"Behaving like this is not going to help anyone. Maybe if we put our minds together we can come up with something,"
she continued.
"Like what? The whole situation is so messed up. Did they kill her? That lady? What if they hurt us? I just want to go home,"
another juror said as she sobbed.
"Let's all sit down and go around the room. Introduce ourselves, and give our personal opinion on what's going on here. Maybe gain perspective of not only what's happening, but why us,"
the man that had started the movement said. Everyone sat down. It was clear that we had to work together.
"My name is Miles. I'm a therapist. I'm not trying to shrink anyone, but I just want to help take control and calm everyone down. Adrenaline is pumping through us all right now, I know, but let's gain perspective on this. I'm Kyle. I agree with Miles. We need to work together."
Miles looked at Kyle and smiled.
"Thanks, Kyle. Now, maybe there is something we all have in common. Could it be we were all selected for a certain reason?"
He paused for a while to gauge the room.
"Okay. How about I ask questions, and you raise your hand to whatever applies?"
he asked. No one objected.
"Okay. Who here works a government job?"
One hand went up.
"Okay. Who's married?"
5 hands went up.
What is the point of these stupid icebreaker questions? You should be asking the real questions, like what is the blackmail they have on us? All of us showed up, didn't we, after the threats? Obviously that means something. Mrs. Blevins sure straightened up the first day when Martin addressed her dirty laundry. "You know nothing about me, jerk," said Mrs. Blevins as she stood up and pointed down on him across the table. "What's your name?" asked Miles. "Shane." "Mrs. Blevins, Shane's right. Whatever they've got on us was bad enough for all of us to ignore our intuition." "And?" Mrs. Blevins popped back. "What do my skeletons have to do with you guys?" she asked. Look, lady, we are just trying to find common ground," said Kyle. Then we all heard the doorknob start to rattle. Then a key turn. Martin opened the door. "I apologize about this whole ordeal. It's been a hectic morning, eh?" he finished with a smile. "What the hell is going on?" said a lady. Our game of tell us your name and something about you hadn't concluded, so I only knew 5 of the jurors' names. Well, 6 if you count Miss Yates. "We had a couple of speed bumps this morning, I admit, but we are close to getting those resolved." "You locked us in here," Carmen said as she stood up and shot him a glare. Everyone in the room got angry again. "It was for your own good. You don't know what she is capable of." "What she's capable of? What about you?" Carmen shot back. "Me? What have I done?" he asked, placing his hand on his chest. "Did you kill her?" asked Kyle. "Kill who?" Martin asked, looking concerned. "Mrs. Yates. We heard everything. The arguing, the screaming, the thump and the silence that followed it," said Carmen. "I haven't seen Mrs. Yates since the last time any of you saw her, when she was running out of the courtroom. We haven't been able to track her down. She even left all her belongings in the locker, including her car keys." "So you're telling us that you had nothing to do with why she was screaming and then thrown to the floor? We all heard it," said Kyle. "I was ordering your lunch in Cheryl's office. Then I placed a call to check on the status of the lawyer," Martin replied. "But you did lock us in, though," shot Mrs. Blevins. "Well, yes, but only to keep you safe. I didn't harm Miss Yates. Hell, I didn't even see her." "To keep us safe from who?" a juror asked. "To keep you safe from what?" Martin corrected the juror. He took a seat at the table with us. "Look, I know you guys must be very frustrated and probably confused," he said as he clasped his hands together at the table. "Yeah," someone shouted. "Can we all just calm down? Lunch will soon be here. We will eat, take a breather, and go back to the courtroom," he said in a calm voice. His demeanor and voice relaxed me. For a moment, I felt at ease. Then I remembered where I was. "Martin, can you tell us what's wrong with this girl?" I asked. "She's sick, Mrs. Gwynn. Very sick," he said. "So why isn't she in a psych ward or a facility that can help her?" "Well, that's the issue. Every place she goes, people end up dying. She has a power over people." "Manipulation?" asked Kyle. "Well, no. More like control. It seems as though if she wants someone to do something, they do it. No matter how out of character it is for that person, no matter how wrong, they just do it," he said as he looked down at his hands. I was very apprehensive of Martin at first, but seeing him now, like this, he looked as scared as us, like he too had been forced into this situation, trapped. "So, what's the end goal here then? Won't more just die wherever we send her?" asked Kyle. "We are seeking the death penalty," Martin replied. Even then, people will die while she awaits death row,
said Kyle.
And it still doesn't explain what happened to Miss Yates,
Miles said. And it didn't. We still had no answers, but with Martin insisting that he knew nothing of it, and being that none of us had evidence, what was the point in continuing to push it, at least for now? We had to think about what our next moves were, how to stay alive and under the influence of our own minds, not hers. Lunch arrived, and everyone ate in silence. Some people finished their meals, others just picked at them. I didn't really have an appetite, but I didn't know the next time I'd get to eat, so I tried to choke down as much as I could. My cold Dr. Pepper distracted me from all the madness for a moment. It was the only thing I had really enjoyed today. Martin had stepped out of the room for a moment to make a call. He came back in as most of us were throwing our trash and cleaning up.
"All right, guys, we are about to head back down,"
he said. I felt the tension rise back up in the room. High tide. I felt like it had only just started to ease up, but we knew where we were going and what we were going back to.
"We only have 11 jurors, though,"
said a juror.
"We have to proceed. There is no time to find another one,"
Martin said back. We followed him once more through all the twists and turns, back down the concrete stairs, through the Victorian-style door. We were the first to arrive. No one else was in there yet. As we walked single file down the aisle and to our jury box, Carmen leaned over my shoulder from behind and whispered,
"We all heard Mrs. Yates, right?"
she asked.
"Yes, all of us,"
I assured her.
"But we never heard anyone speaking to her, did we? I mean, we only heard her."
I thought for a moment. She was right. As close as Mrs. Yates was to the door, we would have heard the other person. But we hadn't heard anyone else. Only a one-sided conversation. Who was this last person to see her? Who was she talking to? I took a seat. Carmen was right about what she had said earlier. Something was very wrong here. I've been called for jury duty, Part 5, by Glitter Cricket. Before I could even settle all the way into my chair, the door to the courtroom busted open. This time, Tori was escorted in not only shackled, but she also had a face mask on, Hannibal Lecter style. That's all I could think about.
"Oh my God, no,"
I thought to myself.
"I've got to get out of here."
I turned towards Carmen to see her reaction. Tori was walking down the aisle on the way to her designated table. She was looking right at us. Then I noticed her and Carmen had locked eyes. Tori was honed in on her. I looked at Carmen, then back to Tori, then back to Carmen. Tears were rolling down Carmen's cheeks. A trickle of blood started to slide out of her nostrils and trace down the edge of her upper lip.
"Carmen, hey, Carmen,"
I said as I lightly shook her arm. Carmen's focus didn't break. The tears got heavier and the blood started to pour.
"Help!"
I yelled to anyone willing to react.
I think she needs help,"
I yelled as I stood to my feet. I put myself between Carmen and Tori to break the eye contact. Carmen continued to stare right into my abdomen, as if she could see through me and was still in an intimate eye lock with that girl.
"Come with me,"
said Martin as he locked arms with Carmen and escorted her out of the courtroom.
No, where are you taking her?"
I screamed.
"I can take her. Let me take her."
All the jurors looked around wildly, partly because of Carmen's state, and maybe partly because I had been so quiet throughout this whole experience, but now was causing a scene. I ran towards the exit of the jury box, but was met by the bailiff.
"Move! That's my friend. I need to be with her,"
I said to the tall, burly man.
"Have a seat, ma'am,"
he responded in his deep, raspy voice.
"No, I need to make sure she's—" "I won't repeat myself."
He slammed his nightstick on the banister mere inches from my hand. I heard the jurors gasp behind me. My heart started to race. I walked back to my seat and sat down, clearly shaken.
"Are you okay, miss?"
Miles asked as he put a hand on my shoulder. I realized he didn't know my name. I had no energy to tell him either. I looked behind me and up at him, face full of fear. I said nothing.
"All rise! The Honorable Judge Ron Wallace presiding,"
shouted the bailiff. His voice made me jump in my seat. We all stood. The judge walked in and took a seat. Then all of us did the same.
"Let's just get straight to this,"
the judge said. A man from the prosecution hopped up and walked towards a corner in the courtroom, close to the witness stand. He grabbed a bag and brought it back to his table. Out he pulled a projector. He set it up and the lights went down. I grew very uneasy. Being in a dim-lit room, I have bad vision. My night vision is non-existent. I don't even drive at night. I felt vulnerable. The projector started and spat as it started to wake up. The prosecutor walked over to us.
"I'm Will Mathers. I will be presenting to you some of the evidence we have collected over the years."
He rambled on for a moment, but I slipped away. All I could think about was Carmen. I wasn't sure what had happened between her and Tori, but I knew it couldn't be good. I heard the door quietly creak, and I looked towards the entrance. It was Martin, slipping in alone. I started to get anxious. Where was Carmen? Was she okay? I started to bounce my right leg, a nervous tic I have had since childhood.
"Sarah Min, February 12, 2013. One of the first victims we have evidence of,"
Mr. Mathers said. The projector flashed to a slide of a young girl, her body bent and broken on the tile floor, blood everywhere, her eyes gouged out, and a strange smile across her face. My stomach turned.
"She was 15, living in Glendale, Arizona. She was Miss Vale's foster sister. The family had reported being scared of Miss Vale on numerous occasions. They had reported the case to a worker and the company manager of the events that had been taking place. They requested Miss Vale be moved, but due to the lack of foster parents in the area, the company told them there was nothing they could do. The violence and torment Miss Vale bestowed on this family was relentless and took place for many months, which ultimately led to the death of Sarah, Vern, and Lacey Mann. Along with the three, both family pets were also killed and found gutted, their innards strung up around the family room." He switched through the slides, showing Vern and Lacey. "Vern was stabbed 63 times, on the chest, face, stomach, and arms. In addition, there are clear defensive wounds across both arms." The slide switched to a close-up of both Mann's arms. I felt so dizzy, like at any moment I would hit the floor. I didn't even watch scary movies. How could I have prepared myself for something so disturbing? This child is a devil, I thought to myself. Lacey was found with a slit across her throat. Mr. Mann's genitals were also found in her throat. Mrs. Blevins hit the floor when it showed Lacey's picture, her body draped over the bed, eyes wide open, mouth wide open. So much blood. Mr. Mathers paused and looked in the direction of Mrs. Blevins. The jurors around her were trying to help her up. Tori started to laugh hysterically.
A manic laugh.
"Order!" the judge yelled at her. "Order! Order!"
She laughed louder. Mrs. Blevins' eyes were wide. She was in shock.
"Get me out of here!"
she yelled.
"I won't spend another minute in here. I won't!" "Take a seat, ma'am," the judge barked. "I won't do this. I can't carry on like this."
I had no idea what that meant. All I could focus on was Tori's laugh. She was still laughing, like it had been pre-recorded, no pauses. Tori was looking right into her soul. We could all feel it. None of the jurors moved a muscle as we watched this all unfold before us.
"Mrs. Blevins, please,"
Martin said. Tori had leaned her head back and was looking at the ceiling. Her laugh was growing even louder. The face mask distorted her voice in a way that made it sound as if it were being projected. So loud. I reached up and put my hands over my ears. I put my head down and started to cry. The judge was trying to regain order. Mrs. Blevins was inconsolable, and Tori still laughing. Mrs. Blevins, the older lady that she was, jumped over the jury box, cleared the banister. She ran straight towards the bailiff, faster than anyone her age should be able to. She grabbed the bailiff's gun and placed it to her temple. There was a unanimous scream from everyone. Utter terror swept through the courtroom. My ears rang, deafening. How could I hear ringing and nothing at all at the same time? I put my fingers in my ears. I had to relieve this. What was wrong with my ears? I looked at the jurors beside me, some with their mouths open, some covering their faces, one crying. I couldn't hear their screams and noises. I could only hear the ringing. Mrs. Blevins was lying in the middle of the courtroom, crimson all around her lifeless body. Was this even real? The brain tries its best to rationalize the irrational. The ringing was so loud, but the sound started to come back. All I could hear was the ringing and the laughing.